I want to say congratulations on the regime. It's incredible. And I would love to begin, I hope, simply by just asking you what your initial reaction was to seeing Agnes on the page.
She was in many ways. Agnes was very open in terms of she could have been interpreted in many different ways. So
Yeah.
she was the person holding the operation together internally in the house.
Mm.
Certainly not politically, but definitely in terms of the furnishings and the inner workings of the house. She knew this. She that his sort of her only power, her only real power, Agnes, is that she understands the inner workings of the house more than anybody else does. And by that I mean plumbing. I mean it's not. She's not.
Right.
It's and so perhaps, and I think that gives her a certain investing in that, being very brilliant at that, gives her a certain illusion of having some sort of agency or control. But she's actually in a situation that is really precarious.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'd suggested to Will that perhaps she might in some way represent the working people who were being
Mm.
made decisions for inside of this closed political bubble,
Yeah.
um, by people who'd not really had any connection to what it was like to live as a worker outside the palace. So and she ended up being that, and that's kind of how she developed.
Yeah, I love that. And I wonder, did you dive further into a backstory for her? Did you have something set out for her if you wouldn't mind sharing that?
There's lots of yes, there are lots of things. I'll share one thing that Kate and I had when we were in the run up. We talked about, just between her and I, we talked about the idea that because Elena was so insecure about her hair
Mm.
and her just generally in her appearance, that
Yeah.
there was a time when Agnes had a substantial amount of hair, but that she'd been requested to just get rid of it in order not to be a threat. But that was something that just between Kate and I, that's something that we talked about.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that because I did wonder about Agnes's very short hair. Um, yeah,
Well, it
and
was it was short because I mean it was short because at the time my hair was short because I'd made a film in a French film with Catherine Deneuve, and I was
mm,
playing a woman who was going through chemotherapy. So we shaved my head.
mhm.
So it was growing out, and it was actually just so perfect for Agnes, who had absolutely no relationship to how, or not no relationship, but she dismissed even thoughts of how she might appear to the world. She moves through the palace essentially like a ghost as part of
Yeah,
the fixtures and fittings, and she's an observer. She's deeply an insider, and through her we we have a sense of there being some sort of repressed moral compass somewhere along the line,
yeah,
you
I
know.
wonder. Yeah, I was going to ask you what it is you think that drives her because when she appears to have some fealty for to Elena, but not entirely, and of
I
course
think
her
she,
child
I think she
is
feels protective of Elena because she's seen her grow, in the
yeah,
way that you sort of, I mean, I love my family, but you can't choose your family, but they're familial in a sense because they've spent lots and lots of time together. Um, but I think really the position that she's in is a completely untenable and manageable, catastrophic one in which a child has kind of been taken from her, and she's now tied to this woman
yeah,
who's mentally unstable in every way, and who nobody really can trust to be in any way responsible. And the
yeah.
child really needs a lot of help. The child really needs a lot of Every child needs a lot of help, but this child particularly needs a certain specific types of care that Elena's not willing to really acknowledge that he needs.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you very, very much for that. And I wonder, would you talk a little bit about Agnes is not absurd. Agnes is very much stable kind of presence, but there's so much absurdity going on around Elena, but also, everything that's happening in the palace and the checking of the humidity, I think it is. Would you talk about kind of being the straight person in with all of this absurdity swirling around you, and what that was like to play?
I mean, she for Agnes, it's life and death
Yeah.
every moment because she's trying to preserve the life of her child. So, but like everybody else, she's world weary, and there are moments where she cannot contain her facial expressions, or she knows that she's allowed to let some out because nobody's looking.
Right.
There are also hysterical moments where she can do nothing but laugh at the ridiculousness of what's happening. But really, at the end of the day, it's quite serious for Agnes because it really is a reality, which is unfortunately what makes it so, not unfortunately, but it's what makes it so funny for the audience in a sense because when things are so dire, often what we're led to is hysterical laughter. Yeah. It's sometimes the only way to cope with things that are, coming from perhaps a very dark place.
Just hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. And then, Agnes is also really capable of such great empathy, and even, her scenes with Herbert, where she's kind of helping with his wounds. Would you talk about that dynamic with him a little bit, and working with Matthias?
Yes, it was wonderful. The relationship between Agnes and Zubak, Matthias's character, really developed and became stronger and stronger as it was being written. And I think, I mean, from my perspective, it just seemed like they are the two pawns in a game of, very high powered chess, one of which has been turned into a weapon himself and now lives with the horrible guilt of that and deals with it by self harm, and the other who is still sort of has her feet planted firmly on some sort of ground, but is being stretched beyond the capacity of any human's capability, emotionally, psychologically, physically. And so I think more than anything, Agnes feels pity for Zubak. And it is a bit of a judgment, but she also feels she feels empathy for the fact that he's been chewed up and swallowed, just in the way that every other worker has, really. Harnessed for the good of other people's power.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you so much. And then I would love to hear a little bit more about working with Kate and, creating these two very different women who are, kind of buckling under some, I think gender specific issues. Of course, Elena's got her insecurities that I think, we learn come from her father quite a bit. And then, Agnes just trying to pull things together and, and also their shared picture of motherhood, which is interesting. And I wonder if you would just kind of talk about the dynamic on screen and then also just working with Kate.
It's wonderful working with Kate. She's an inspiration. She's full of brilliant ideas constantly. She's fun. She's supportive.
Yeah.
She's a great leader. She's really a wonderful person. And so to play Elena and Agnes, sorry.
No problem.
To play Elena and Agnes was, I mean, it was for us, of course, tickled us. And, I mean, it was of course, objectively, absolute madness. Um, and lots of fun in that way. But it was actually such an awkward, tense relationship between
Mm.
Elena and Agnes.
Yeah.
One who'd been blessed with a child, but really had no agency over the child or her own life. And the other who decided to pick a child up on a whim, and try a hand at motherhood. So the hatred really coming from Agnes toward Elena, it becomes deeper and deeper rooted and more seething as time goes on, to the point where she has, and this is a spoiler situation, but she has to look for, ways to deal with it. She has to look for
Mm.
a solution.